And I turn it over to Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I've been retired for 20 years, but anyway. So getting to the specifics of the talk, I always worry about whether I'm carrying coals to Newcastle, to use the difficult statement. And I'm hoping that some of what I have to say is new for people here. And I looked back at previous talks in this particular group of humanists, and I saw a negative population growth with Michael Hanauer in 2013, Humanist Creation Story, Patrick Everett in December of 2018, and actually Artificial Intelligence, Destroyer or Savior, with Carl Feynman, and I'm not sure I got the second name correct, but
Ryopka.
2019. Okay, without further ado, I begin with a spoiler alert that you probably expect anyway, that too many people is subjective and different people can hold radically different views. I suspect that within the humanist group, the views are more uniform, but in any event, there are a lot of different views out there. And I start with a brief refresher for the historical perspective on global population. And let's see, share the screen and move forward. The expansion in global population numbers has been going on for centuries.
I don't see the screen, Lee.
You can't see the screen. Thank you for telling me. I much appreciate it. How's that?
There you go. Great.
Yeah, keep telling me if I mess up. Okay, the expansion has been going on for centuries, since about 180, showing up as 0 on the scale. I guess you can take whatever starting point you want. I demonstrate these numbers with time on the x-axis and population on the y-axis. The visibly rapid growth in population on since 0 began roughly with the start of Christianity at time 0 on the graph. The numbers show a remarkable success story for humanity. How did we pull off this population growth? One view using Bible phraseology is humans have gone forth, been fruitful, and multiplied. Looking at the graph, you can also plainly see that we would have a problem if we were to continue too long on our growth trajectory. Such a rate of increase seen in the last few centuries could not continue forever on a finite planet. And then a funny thing happened in the last few decades. Even though the global population is still increasing, as suggested by the growth, the rate of increase is dropping. Here we see that for the US population, with births, deaths, migration, and a clear decline in population numbers in recent years, shown as the solid black line. Okay, for purposes of this talk, I invoke science in general and genetics in particular. I point out that the human population started with a genetic Adam and Eve, who have some correspondence to the Bible's Adam and Eve. The characters in this genetic story are chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve. So who is mitochondrial Eve? She was the prototypical first female Homo sapien, where Homo sapien is defined by a set of genes. Biological genetic scientists generally take the position that every living human today carries mitochondrial genes from the first ever human female. Mitochondria act as the powerhouses of our cells, and the mitochondrial genome contains 37 genes. The good news and the bad news is that wear and tear in these mitochondrial genes occurs due to mutations. Allowing for some inaccuracies and not a perfect score, we have a workable science-based theory on the timescale given the mutations. Scientists have estimated that the first Homo sapien woman appeared about 200,000 years ago. Males, on the other hand, do not deliver their mitochondrial genes to their sons. Only mothers give mitochondrial genes to offspring. Looking elsewhere within the cell nucleus, the male Y chromosome is a trace of male lineage going from fathers to sons. I have read that the genes of this Y chromosome are not as well behaved as the mitochondrial genes. They are less convenient for tracing back to a timeline origin for male Homo sapiens. However, we're told that the Y male chromosomes and their mutations appear to be consistent with the same time origin as for women about 200,000 years ago. That is good news, meaning that Adam and Eve arrived on the Earth scene at about the same time, so they were able to get together to produce their offspring. And if you were to believe the Bible, not necessarily, Adam arrived shortly before Eve. This genetic beginning is somewhat symbolic since nobody was there to record the details, but the story is largely based on conventional science. Today's descendants from Adam and Eve now number 7.9 billion living, almost 8 billion. Reaching these numbers wasn't always a smooth ride for parenting along the way. During one of the largest explosive eruptions on Earth, the Toba catastrophe 70,000 years ago, speculation is that the human population may have dropped to as low as 1,000 to 10,000 humans. That is described as a bottleneck in the human population numbers, but solid evidence for that bottleneck is not available. Population growth since Adam and Eve is a story built from human births and deaths. The growth happened one Homo sapien at a time, most of the time usually initiated in a few moments of passion. The creation process is now being repeated well over 100 million times each year. Each new Homo sapien is living on average for 78 years until death, although the life was somewhat shorter during duration in the past. Given the population growth dynamics, the potential exists for a quick and huge population increase with birthing, as well as a long, slow decline in population numbers with deaths, barring catastrophes. Time is against us if we should want to reduce the world population by attrition, not to mention the ethical and moral issues of forced attrition. Each birth, unless balanced by a death, is adding to a burden of humanity on the planet. So that's a short historical view of the human population timeline and data. Is there a problem now with so many humans, Homo sapiens on the Earth? You can find any kind of yes or no answer you want in the literature, on the web, and in different people's minds. In reality, we wait for the consequences of our actions to finish playing out in the future, probably observed and suffered by our descendants. Some societies, nations, families, and other social groupings, and some individuals, not necessarily so many, say to just forget about the population question. They say there is no population problem. And if there is, the population numbers will take care of themselves and nothing needs to be done. We should just chill. Among the various population players in the modern world, parents who make personal decisions about having children or not seem to be particularly important in determining population numbers. Sometimes, of course, it is biological emotions, not reason, that drive the numbers due to the primitive side of human nature. On the personal level, we have some people saying, I don't want children. A few people, including a few that I know, have said, I do not want children because the global situation is not good and having kids has global consequences. Looking at myself, I have 3 kids, so I have to ask myself, am I a piece of the global population problem and consequence? I save my answer for another time. Okay, so looking around for other viewpoints, one can find from Indigenous Americans the following: according to the great law of the Iroquois Confederacy, in our every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. Let's see, 7 generations is roughly 140 years. For our present generation, we should have made the deliberations about current population numbers back in the 1880s when Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell were making names for themselves with inventions for light and sound. That points to a problem with humans in that everybody thinks new and now and not 140 years from now. There are a few exceptions. Japanese-style home mortgages can last 100 years. The old Vermont slate roof can last 100 to 200 years. But of course, we don't know what kind of scenario the world will face in 140 years from now. With such a fast-moving world, we do not know. To focus on the current scenario, which is potentially a declining population, I have a graphic. I personally am one of those on the top platform. And you can see that as the number of people, younger people decreases, they have to carry more and more older people. We need people to carry us along. Okay, there's some other consequences which may or may not be bad depending on your point of view. Stated in stark terms by David Brooks, a New York Times op-ed columnist with whom you may be familiar, with few children, the family nuclear structure may no longer be so viable, he continues. The shift from bigger and interconnected extended families to smaller and detached nuclear families, which we have now, ultimately led to a familial system that liberates the rich and ravages the working class and the poor. So, excuse me. Another thought on this is a return might occur to some type of developing family structure employed historically by indigenous Americans, and it might have a comeback. This is the fictive kinship. Sociologists define the concept as a format with extended family members who are not related by either blood or marriage. Examples of chosen kin include godparents, informally adopted children, and close family friends. There are fictive kinships in our midst. I know of one group near Marlborough, and have read of one near Boston. Other descriptors for similar sounding groups might be intentional communities, communes, and fraternities and sororities. Okay, let me turn off this slide here. Here we go. Having gathered viewpoints, we're back at the question, how many people is too many? Do we need people in sufficient numbers to survive another Toba event or a huge meteorite from outer space, such as the one that is thought to have wiped out the big dinosaurs? A modern illustration of cosmic uncertainty is the following. In a recent news story dated October 4th, 2021, a rock believed to be a meteorite is reported to have crashed through the roof of a woman's house and landed on the pillow next to her. Some time ago, I read a similar story about a meteorite going through the roof and landing on the coffee table in the living room. So world uncertainties, cosmic and otherwise, do not allow us to accurately predict an optimal population size. One environmental concept suggesting that we have too many people is the tipping point. Another name for this is a state shift in Earth's biosphere. We're talking about a sudden, unpredictable change, sometimes called a discontinuity, perhaps foreshadowed but not predicted. The likelihood of a tipping point was discussed on BBC and PBS last fall. It was a subject of papers from the Columbia University Climate School last fall, and in Nature magazine with 22 authors from around the world, organized in 2012 from UC Berkeley. A tipping point is the point at which small changes become significant enough to cause a larger, more critical change that can be abrupt, irreversible, and lead to cascading effects. These effects are all the possible bad changes in our population that we read about as we muddy up our planet with our behaviors, like changes in the ocean currents, increasing CO2, and pandemics. While we take our time with deciding how many people are suitable in the world, we have the concept of Gaia, so it is Gaia, which is the view of planet Earth as a living being. The Gaia hypothesis is a model of the Earth in which its living and non-living parts are viewed as a complex interacting system thought of as a single organism. And you probably, many here have heard of it already, quite likely. Developed circa 1972, largely by British chemist James Lovelock and US biologist Lynn Margulis. The Gaia hypothesis is named for the Greek Earth goddess In an anthropomorphic view of life, Gaia is a living being. The problem brought on the planet by human population has echoes from Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring. Silent Spring is considered the book that started the global grassroots environmental movement. Released in 1962, it focuses on the negative effects of chemical pesticides such as DDT that were at the time a large part of the US agriculture. Rachel Carson and her work began initiating a shift in global environmental consciousness. Unfortunately, any proposed solution to reducing population, when deemed essential, is fundamentally different from banning DDT, because we can't ban kids. So we say the problem will take care of itself? Similar to the Silent Spring, some or many would say that the large population size is seriously and silently aggravating global warming, environmental pollution, habitat loss, the sixth mass extinction, and consumption of finite natural resources such as fresh water, arable land, and fossil fuels, throwing in also deforestation and global warming. Looking at the future, let's suppose that in some remarkable way, the population stabilizes with a smaller and reasonable number of Homo sapiens. Can we say how many people the Earth can support? Sustainable population refers to steady state or equilibrated human population on the Earth. Estimates vary widely, ranging from 0.65 billion to 98 billion. Better numbers are needed. Also, not necessarily evident in the sustainable population concept is exactly what kind of human lifestyle is being sustained. Is it a US lifestyle for everyone in the world, or does everyone accept a Bangladesh lifestyle? Let me turn on the slide again. Let's see. Have to get back to the right slide here. It's going the wrong way. I'll be with you in a minute, I hope. Hey, there we go. Yeah, there we go. So one metric for current lifestyle, but this is very imperfect.
Lee, there's no slides.
Oops, thank you. How are we doing? Is oil consumption. Lifestyle and the demands on the Earth vary dramatically around the world, as illustrated by oil consumption. The bottom line, and what we see here is that, the US, Canada, and I guess this is Saudi Arabia over here, are bright red, meaning they use the most oil. And then we can see it trickles down to other places. The bottom line is that the more the energy used per person, the more comfortable is the lifestyle. And the more the world wants the US lifestyle, the greater is the consumption, and the fewer the number of people that can be reasonably sustained, whatever the number. Okay, so we therefore have to deal with the fact that the US lifestyle, or the North American lifestyle, is a problem in a global sense. Of course, another factor is the crystal ball to tell us about future events. And I have to say, I have not had a very good record with looking in the crystal ball. When transistors came out and when plastics started receiving widespread use, I seriously underestimated their potential. So what cataclysms or marvelous science breakthroughs may be in store to determine human survivors, but not in our crystal ball for the future? Cataclysms were previously mentioned, such as rocks from outer space, but as to breakthroughs, for example, on February 9th, recently, a nuclear fusion reactor produced a new record amount of power, enough to boil 60 kettles of water, with a goal of a limitless supply of clean energy. The current result, 60 kettles of water, doesn't sound very impressive so far, and the whole project sounds potentially risky to me, but we wait and see, and we must also be careful what we wish for. Okay, so we get into the subject of automation technology, which always seems to show up, and I have quite a bit to say on that subject. I mentioned the role of technology, which is having an ever more dramatic and not fully foreseen effect on us humans and our numbers. As we all know, humans have figured out how to extract energy from the earth and to harness the earth's materials and resources for human needs and to mold the earth for human needs. Technology modifies the landscape, converts raw resources into other materials, fills dumps, helps heal people so they stay alive and reproduce even more, and send people to the moon, to name a few things. The impact on human capabilities and human survival has been awesome. One way to frame the core of technology benefits is all forms of energy, not just oil, energy from oil, as I previously mentioned. The use of energy coupled with materials has been our biggest benefactor, and I would say our worst enemy. We can see an immediate consequence of large-scale energy use in environmental damage and pollution, including excess CO2 production, which is being blamed for rising Earth temperature. An important point is that energy use is a multiplier because as the number of humans increases, a proportionate increase in harnessing energy consequentially occurs. So when we ask, is there a population problem, it has to be considered as a problem, not only in the numbers of humans, but also of the harnessed energy, machines, technology, so forth, that each human uses. Moreover, a bigger population of machines has the same negative green effect as a bigger human population. And let's see, let me get another slide here. Okay, so we have a global impact, which is a multiplier involving population. I hope you all see the picture this time, which is population, the affluence, like what we have in North America, and technology. The three multiply against each other. To visualize the role of machines, I find it helpful to human speak of them as energy servants. The reason sometimes humans are better able to think about the abstract by anthropomorphizing. In other words, picturing complicated non-human things as human. For example, we have the Grim Reaper, Mother Earth, Father Time, to name but a few. For example, Michelangelo drew the human face of God in the Sistine Chapel. In other words, anthropomorphizing God. I keep thinking about how Mother Earth and Father Time put limits on me. Energy servants include things like washing machines, computers, automobiles, and you name it. To visualize in terms of energy servants, we can think of energy use the same way we think about the energy of individual humans before machines. I have a visual to stand in for the energy servants, and brace yourself. Meet T3. T3 should trade in its weapon for a shovel for most present purposes. If for some reason you're not acquainted with Terminator 3, he was one of the humanoids, indistinguishable from humans, except for eyes having a faint red glow, and initially under human control, but later only under machine control. Okay, let me just turn that one off in a minute. So going way back in time, humans had their own body to use as an energy servant. It was about, if we want to do full-time power, on average, a 100-watt light bulb is equivalent to the energy that a person can produce. Even though humans are amazing, they do not do as well as on energy use as T3. Today, each American uses energy amounting to roughly 1,000 energy servants. These servants provide us luxury and create comforts that the pharaohs of Egypt could only have dreamed of. For example, my wife and I bought ourselves a Roborock, which is an automated vacuum cleaner, because we felt we needed to be aware of what technology is doing and what the heck, we need to see what these things are all about. Okay, so the world average of energy servants is something less than 500 per person, less than half that of the US. By way of contrast, in Bangladesh, the number is still more like two energy servants per person. Increasing the number of servants contributes in the same way as increasing the number of humans, because both use energy. An overwhelming number of our energy servants are also polluters using non-renewable energy. It is too easy to say, in my opinion, oh, well, we see there's a problem and we'll just design better energy servants for the future. After all, they are automatons designed by humans, and they're not as smart as humans in the important ways. After all, we call it artificial intelligence, not real intelligence. So no problem, we can fix any automatons with improved design. But if we ignore what is going on, I would claim, with developing automation intelligence, and if we're being naive about it, we ignore it at our peril. Gaia, which I referred to before, is an anthropomorphic view of Earth. And I mentioned that James Lovelock was one of the originators of the concept. Lovelock used to believe that the growth of population is putting humanity on a course to disaster. Lovelock was forecasting a major destruction of global life and society, an apocalypse after population-induced collapse of the world. You know, lawless marauders preying on the helpless and armed conflict everywhere. It sounds a little bit like Europe at the moment. Anyway, and of course, the response from others was, take it easy. The world population growth rate is slowing down, so the disaster is being avoided. But then a funny thing happened when Lovelock reached 100 years old. He concluded that the way our world would be saved was through cyborgs, machines related to T3 with artificial intelligence and control. I kid you not. The dominant form of life in his scenario becomes artificial intelligence that controls machines. In the following discussion, I use the term AI rather than cyborgs as a more encompassing term for interconnected technology. It is easy to be dismissive and say, hey, humans are in control. They design AI, and the AI may be smart, but not in human ways. On the other hand, what happens when the AI designers and the actual AI have common goals, and these goals are destructive of overall human needs and of our world? We must recognize that Homo sapiens and automation are not individually, but rather combined in overwhelming Earth resources, creating pollution and introducing destabilizing ills of our life on Earth. To quote from Lovelock's rather crude reference to human beings, I am not concerned with the evolution of lumps of flesh, in other words, humans, that can move around and do things, managed by a somewhat primitive intelligence. He continued, humans should surrender their position of privilege and give up to more intelligent life. Can humans be saved from the numerous threats that exist in the cosmos? I don't know, but I hope so. Lovelock is essentially talking about the prospect of energy overlords rather than energy servants, a similar idea, but a different role for AI, depending on who is in charge, Homo sapiens or machines. For present purposes, I continue to refer to the energy overlords as AI. The key questions with AI are twofold. First, does AI have the capability to control unruly humans who have minds of their own? The second question is, if AI is in control, do they have the smarts, even as much or more than humans, to make the necessary adjustments to keep the population and energy servant combo away from destroying the planet? Or might they decide that humans are superfluous to the world and should be done away with? I set aside the question of AI autonomous thinking, decision-making capability, because I have faith that AI could in fact limit the number of humans and their destructive capabilities, as well as those of machines. However, the prospect of this AI role seems potentially terrifying because it is so unknown what AI could do when freed from the limitations of human intelligence and human ethics and principles. That is a subject perhaps for another time, except that already we have instances where AI is being freed from human ethics and principles and is advancing to apparent unethical practices, which I mention in a few minutes. In defense of Lovelock's faith in automation and suburbs, it's important to recognize the rate at which AI continues to develop. To give one example, new vehicles are now computers on wheels, gathering an estimated 25 gigabytes per hour of driving data, the equivalent of 5 HD movies per hour. You probably noticed, but may not have noticed, how AI is being used more and more to control human behavior, as well as their own machine behavior. In other words, AI is ramping up the global population of machines so that overpopulation no longer means population of Homo sapiens, but also the population of machines. And I'm thinking back to the talk yesterday, State of the Union, when there's a talk about building new plant, major plant to create chips, which will be used in automation. The AI control machinery has been developed with increasing success. So the emphasis here on the word success, and is now being used by Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, to give a few examples of very successful companies. We should recognize that these various companies are interested in making money, not in simply satisfying human needs and interests. The question is becoming more and more, not are there too many humans, but are there too many entities in the human-machine complex? Given finite resources and space, the T3s, the AI, cyborgs, or whatever you want to name them, can crowd out number-wise the humans, ultimately leading us to, yes, there are too many humans. More about the AI-supported companies that seek to dominate our human attention and action by feeding us information selected to alter our behaviors. In other words, the machines are, if you accept the viewpoint, and I think there's a good reason for accepting it, it's providing us information to alter our behavior. We see that human ethics and principles may be ignored by AI in pursuit of higher goals. To understand the current AI role, imagine you are on one side of the screen, a whole array of technologists on the other side, feeding you selected information and working to change your opinions and attitudes. It has similarities to the movie Inside and Out, and it also can be looked at as explaining why people are getting so polarized. Even a small change in individual human behavior is monumental because the change occurs among vast numbers of screen-supported people. The information that AI chooses for you personally is tailored to keep you watching and responding in programmed ways. So if you're conservative, keeps you thinking that way. If you're liberal, keeps you thinking that way. And the fed information is different for each person. My brother gets different information than I do, very different. And AI does not care if the information is true or false, so long as it keeps your attention on the screen. And it does not need to know how to differentiate truth from falsehood. And we know that we hear about that quite frequently. To be dramatic about it, we are fed the Kool-Aid of biased information to the point of irrationality, where we can no longer, as a people, answer the question, are there too many people, in a constructive and actualizing way. They program us to keep us engaged, sending us politically polarizing information and modifying our purchasing decisions, our voting decisions, our lifestyle decisions, our social decisions. So too, they can modify whether we believe in overpopulation, how many children we want, what energy servants or overlords, what energy servants, shall we say, we buy and employ. The list goes on as to what can be controlled. We should understand this is not heavy-handed control, but subtle and deliberate control that shows up in the data they collect from us and makes a huge difference within the world and within any group they select. I should like to mention some homework if you haven't already watched, and if you choose. There's a video on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, which is an interesting perspective on AI along the lines which I just described. My whole family watched the video, with my daughter more interested in how the screens suck us in and not so much on the political issues. Based on the preceding discussion of energy servants, AI, and so forth, we end up with a revision of the initial question, are there too many people in the world? The revision is, are there too many people in AI machines in the world? Because it's not just people, it's a combination, including AI servants and overlords. In other words, are there too many people in the world? It's no longer a relevant question because the automation, the AI, the robots, the machines cannot be left out of the equation. And yes, in the reframed question, I argue that yes, we are at risk of too many. That is the bottom line for what I have to say. If time permits, well, I'll hold off for a minute, at least. If time permits and anyone wants to ask, I can quickly add solutions to the people overpopulation. I can add solutions to the people overpopulation question provided by an environmental journalist a few years ago, but it's not necessarily good solutions, but solutions. So there you have it.
Thank you, Dr. Ostrander. I'm interested in those solutions.
Okay.
I don't like the typical way overpopulated groups crash, which is the apocalyptic horseman.
Okay. Horseman.
That's what we're in the middle of, it seems to me.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. It'll take, maybe 2 or 3 minutes or less. Do that and then come back to questions. Is that a good way to go? All right. All right. What I'm about to say, I think is very interesting, but it's not, doesn't seem to me is really the total answer. Okay. It's environmental journalist David Roberts. Is anybody heard of him? Let's see if I can check and see. Anyway, let me just continue on. He specializes in clean energy and politics. He writes for Vox, VOX, which has 20 million viewers. He's written that he never talks about overpopulation. His words are that the subject of overpopulation is morally and politically fraught. The word fraught here means causing or having extreme worry or anxiety, as for example, we are living in fraught times. Sounds like it. He adds that racism, xenophobia, and eugenics are lurking in the wings when talking about overpopulation. So instead, he has an alternative. He talks about population question without talking about the population question. He offers the following alternative ways of talking. He talks instead about a carbon mitigation strategy. He has 2 methods. Method 1, women empowerment. Go for promoting family planning. Go for education of girls. He quotes a study that says this has a potential of preventing 120 gigatons of greenhouse gases by 2050 through population reduction. The second method, wealth adjustment. Since fertility goes down with financial income, we should prevent accumulation of extreme wealth through taxes so that those less wealthy and poverty may increase in wealth and will therefore have lower fertility. Let's see, I got another slide if I can get to it. There we go. Okay. Those were the richest 10%, you can see at the top, are responsible for almost half of the total lifestyle consumption emissions. And down at the bottom, you see the poor people have a less effect or poor in terms of producing pollution. And so his idea is to get rid of the top 10% in terms of their ability to create pollution. So Robert's exact but rather crude words were you could do that bleep by, you could do that reduction in extreme wealth by, for instance, taxing the bleep out of wealthy people. I'll say it again. You could do that, reduce extreme wealth by, for instance, taxing the bleep out of wealthy people. I'm leaving out the word there. The anticipated carbon impact of these methods is the same as reducing overall population, which gives the planet Gaia more space for existing humans, or to anthropomorphize again, more breathing room for all Homo sapiens. So the 2 thoughts, one from Roberts and the other about AI, are quite different from each other in a way, but nevertheless, they're both ideas that relate to how one deals with the number of people on the planet. So there you have it. Stop.
How do you have any ideas on ways to make that politically possible?
You mean the Roberts things?
Yeah, tax the rich and give to the poor.
Well, let's see. Let's see, Bernie Sanders. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but the one thing the Democrats are really good at doing is stopping the progressives. They can't
Well,
stop Republicans, but they can stop the
I mean,
progressives.
if I knew how to do it, I guess I'd really make a name for myself. So no, I don't. I mean, but the first one about,
What about the we tax greenhouse gas content of fossil fuels and then divide up the tax money and pay it out to people in direct checks,
yeah,
equal checks. That counters, that reduces economic inequality and climate change.
yeah, okay.
Make free education and free healthcare
Mhm.
tax supported. We don't even need to tax the rich to do that. We can use modern monetary theory to actually spend the money into an existence through our government without it causing inflation or anything else. And delivery of free education through the internet.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done. And my goal here was not to try to get a lot of details, but to look at the big picture overview. And, once you have that, then you can begin to get into the sort of details that you're describing, Pamela, in order to address the problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it seems like, I've been hearing forever about overpopulation, Malthus and Paul Ehrlich's Limits of Growth, Club of Rome. We keep saying there's an upper limit, and consequently, we have these new technology, better agriculture. It's like a third of the soil, is basically used for agriculture. But consequently, when we squeeze down like that, we have to make changes in lifestyle. And I'd point out that now 50% of the human population is living in cities, which is I'm a suburb guy, so I just can't imagine that would be the future. We might as well be underground, living in caves or something. But
And I'm a country guy, so there you go.
but just another thing is, E.O. Wilson passed, I guess, a month ago or so. But one of his books was called Half Earth, where he wanted to reserve half of the planet for the biospecies, for animals, insects, and things. And I know that sounds like a pipe dream, but I mean that. Do you think there's any limits on what is a sustainable limit? Because with a lot of people think we've already hit it with climate change. And even if it takes 40 years to do something, that's probably going to be too late anyway.
Yeah, I was not trying to get at a number. I mentioned, a very broad range number, like less than $1 billion to almost 100 billion. I was looking and trying to get a feeling for what the risks were, where we can end up getting blindsided, where things can go wrong. So that as we work to better solutions, and you notice I didn't spend too much time talking about solutions, but as we work towards better solutions, we can be aware, that there's some major issues out there that have to be considered. And so I was trying to look at those major issues.
Lee,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. You just mentioned again this, what is a sustainable number, and that you've seen numbers of anywhere from a $500 million to 100 billion. And I've studied this exclusively. There's a lot of wonderful data on the environmental footprint network for people to see, which shows that virtually every nation in the world is overpopulated. And I'm wondering, who are these people that think that we could sustain where we are now, let alone, 10 times where we are? They must be in the top 1% who gain from all this growth. They're probably economists who just want to grow forever. But I find that scary, these are like global warmer deniers to me, that anybody could say we could support even more people than we've got, let alone 10 times more people than we've got.
Yeah, the only thing I noticed, I didn't include it in what I was talking about, but there was, let's see, the billionaires, the one who does the electric vehicles.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, and Jack Ma had a meeting in which they were talking about the need for keeping the population numbers up. So I had that, but the problem is, there's so many different people. I mean, we have so many people in the world, and everybody has their opinion. And a lot of them are wrong. I agree with you.
But I don't understand why you focus on population. It seems to me the problem is the amount of carbon that's being put into the atmosphere. And it's the United States that's the big problem. I mean, that's one of them anyways, it seems to me, or those 10% of people that are at the top that are making.
But it isn't just the carbon. It's the entire destruction of ecosystems.
I
And
agree with
even if we have to support and protect ecology, the Gaia idea. And I don't know how.
I mean,
yeah,
carbon is a product of the number of people, times the number of people using it. But at the same time, as Pamela just said, what about the overfishing? What about the no place to put our trash? What about the water problems? What about the traffic? I mean, all of those things are things that are going to kill us off. Carbon problems are no problems. And if all you're looking at is carbon, carbon is largely just a symptom of our escape from sustainability, and population growth is a big part of that.
but how the population lives is the major part of it. The earth can sustain a whole different amount of people depending on how they live.
If they want to live even a European lifestyle,
That's a
the
false.
only way to do it is with significantly fewer people than we have now. Read the Environmental Footprint Network site. Change
the energy production of that lifestyle.
Energy isn't everything. Even if we can change the energy lifestyle, we've still got all the traffic. We still need water. We still are producing food, and the only way we're doing it is with pesticides and herbicides that are killing us. Oh, and that are also dependent on oil.
Like watch.
It'd be a problem if everybody rode a bicycle.
That won't help either. Watch Kiss the Ground. The movie, the documentary Kiss the Ground. We have to do regenerative agriculture, change the way we grow our food. The TED Talk, How I Fell in Love with a Fish, is another example. Living that way can allow more humans to live sustainably at a better lifestyle. And it has to be everyone. We can't leave poor people cutting down all their trees to burn them for cooking.
All of those things have some validity, but population is the multiplier of virtually every problem we face.
Yes, but since we're in an ecological system, like all of the problems are multipliers of every other problem.
I disagree.
Well, I will tell you, let me say, okay, population is the worst problem we've got. Okay, but how do you get it lower?
I'm not going to talk about that. The first thing we have to do is have organizations like the Sierra Club and 350.org start making awareness that population is an important factor. Awareness that there's a problem. Awareness Oh, no, they avoid the issue. The Sierra Club in the 70s, Pamela, called the United States the most overpopulated nation in the world. Now, to be politically correct, they won't even mention the word.
They go like Dave Roberts that I mentioned. Don't talk about it.
I was
Because you
encouraged
get-
by,
you wanna- you get encourage the fascists. The eugenicists. What, Andy?
excuse me, I tried to say something. I was encouraged by the fact that because of all of the awareness of climate change, it's kind of hard to ignore it, that people are becoming more aware and the populations are declining somewhat, maybe not fast enough. I don't know what the rate of decline is, but I also agree that education, especially educated women, is going to reduce the size of families, and people are going to want to invest more in their children. They're not going to want to have their own personal tribe. Is there any other folks that would like to ask questions or?
Actually, I have a comment maybe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's see. There's this global perspective about, carbon and et cetera, et cetera. But then there's the local perspective. Take one of those highly overpopulated countries, say in Africa. I happen to be from one of those countries. Okay. I have seen the impact of overpopulation personally in the stretching of all available resources to the limit, and people living on the margins. A slight imbalance sends hundreds of thousands of people into starvation and famine. So that is, in other words, they're a critical point. It's a critical, equilibrium. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that concern me. Okay, most, because for those countries, I don't think they produce a lot of carbon. I don't think, in fact, they're very poor. Okay, but at the same time, this overpopulation is really, really stretching them to the limit. So the way you solve those problems, in my opinion, is somebody mentioned right now, is through educating women and those kinds of other types of interventions, in fact, that will bring, that will make it less desirable for, people to have, large families and so on and so forth. So I think that's the side that I see, okay, that I am aware of the most. All the other issues that you guys raised, of course, are relevant. Of course, carbon is relevant. Of course, environmental degradation is relevant. All of that on a global scale. But I see a much more serious problem in some of these countries that are exponentially, increasing in terms of population and really getting into a critical phase.
Which countries are you talking about?
Ethiopia, for instance, Nigeria, for instance, Chad, for instance, okay? They're just stretching their resources. You should see, their cities, the way people live, the crowds, the living, standards, and how a slight imbalance in anything sends huge numbers of people into, into disaster, into, a critical situation.
Yeah.
So clearly that's a situation that needs intervention, but intervention in a positive way. For instance, through, education, through, I'm not an expert on those things, but I know education is a very important one. Educating women, for instance, is a big, big issue, right? So to me, that's immediate.
I didn't include it in my talk, but there's a group in Canada that produces soap operas to provide information about important issues related to environment and population. And the idea there is to get the message out to people. In other words, if you have country, East Africa somewhere. If they don't get the concepts, then they don't get the solutions. And so it's nice of us to talk about, well, we want to promote family planning and educate girls. How are we going to do this? And there are people who are doing it. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm saying that there are other ways to do it that aren't being used.
Yeah, in most countries, it's way beyond educating women and providing birth control. You've got to have social entitlements so people feel that they'll be supported from medical needs or supported in old age, you know, because people have very real needs to have a lot of children, and those needs decrease when you have these entitlements. Education isn't enough, you know, where the rubber meets the road. It's needed, but it's not enough.
Yeah, but
I have to-
providing entitlement in a very poor country, okay, with a large population, that's a tall order,
You bet
Well,
it's a
the
tall
problem-
order.
right?
A lot of the problem is corruption. When wealth is, when resources are ineffectively distributed because of corruption, doesn't matter what kind of government you got, right? It turns out that war increases population. You thought it would get rid of some, but it doesn't. The birth rate goes up during war. The birth rate of Afghanistan went up during the war there. So that's another thing in order to get the birth rate down, you have to do. How do you get the benefits to everybody?
Well, I mean, you can do this by by mandate, government mandate. I mean, one thing that's been discussed here. Or you can also do it by getting people better informed. Okay, I mean, there's no one solution, but it seems to me that it's an advantage to include both.
It's a combination. Yeah,
Right.
in terms of education is an important part. The two issues that you raised are also very important. You know, government mandates and, you know, government intervention in a strong way is also important.
We've got all the same problems that you have in Africa here in the US in different ways. There's a huge homeless population cluttering up the freeways all over California and the other southern states, in every city in the United States. Homelessness is rampant. Poverty is increasing. It's frightening, the degeneration. How do you think we can get? We already have a birth rate in most Western nations that is significantly below our replacement rate.
Well, we're certainly making up for that by importing people. And that's what big business loves. It's cheaper labor. So we're still increasing our population. And I also like to mention, you know, world population growth has decreased, but our population is still increasing, you know, going toward another at least 2 billion people in another 60 years. And even in this country, going toward another 70 million people, largely through immigration. And that's going to take up, with the sprawl it creates, more space than all the national parks combined. A huge, huge amount of
That
further construction and development and paving over what we have, and loss of nature and loss of habitat. And you know, the economists that just say grow, grow, grow. And, you know, it's mostly economists that are saying, oh, the United States should raise its fertility rate, or Japan is in real trouble. Japan is very happy with what's going on in terms of not growing, but the economists are going crazy, you know, and we have to start looking at how we save the planet. You know, the economy belongs to the planet.
Not all the economists. Look at Piketty and Robert Reich, for example, not to mention Stiglitz.
I'll temper that is, yes, that's true, but look at what virtually every business school is teaching today.
Which political will, we know the solutions, but we can't implement them.
We
In my
also,
opinion-
yeah, we also have issues with, because of climate change and also war, we have mass influxes of refugees, people moving around, migrants, and that's causing all kinds of social
yeah.
adjustment. That,
There are about 750 million people who would like to come to the United States. That's 3 times the population we have now. And most of them are more deserving in terms of the poverty they live in than the people that are coming across our borders right now.
You're talking about politics, though.
Those people are already on the earth.
That's right.
So there's a humanist principle of showing compassion, and keeping immigrants out is not very compassionate or not consistent with humanist principles. And also, I think, makes no difference to the total population of the earth.
Right. It's
It makes a big difference, Paul. But more than that, I will say a humanist principle is also looking at reason and looking at the future and what we're doing. And I think you're being very, very limited on your thinking about what humanism is about.
How so?
By encouraging more people to come here, they come here and they increase their standard of living, increase their carbon footprint.
Who's
They
encouraging?
therefore don't, let me finish, please. They don't stay where they are and fight. They're generally the leaders that could change where they are. We should be helping people where they are, not encouraging people to come here, I believe. And you know, it's really a very short-term looking argument to say everybody who wants to should come here. That will destroy the
Who said
world
that?
and destroy us as well.
Go ahead, Lee, anytime.
I just wanted to clarify one thing that I don't necessarily agree with Mike about in terms of the information that I've seen, which is that the numbers, the population change for immigrants is having an impact. One of the figures that I had there included births, deaths, and international migration. International migration is not going up. It's holding steady, or actually could say it looks like it's declining. So, I mean, I think we have to make sure we got good numbers. So mainly what I say.
And we also, I agree with you, Mike, about we got to help them where they are. Well, we can't help. We aren't doing that, a good job of that for our current population. The healthcare is awful. The social safety net support is awful. The funding for the kind of energy that would make the world better, the ecological system support is awful. Nothing.
Pamela, I agree with you. We can't support the number of people we've got now, let alone even more people. We can't keep up with any aspect of it, including our politics.
Well, we could support
Lee-
them.
Lee, the numbers I just stated are from the Census Bureau.
Okay,
Well,
the numbers I stated
Could I ask
are,
a question about the difference between the problems? Would our situation be better if lots more people lived in cities and concentrated areas? And how much does suburban living lead to, extra driving, all sorts of other problems connected with our rather luxurious lifestyle here in
I think that's
Concord nearby?
I think that's important, but don't you think the answer has got to be, it depends? Because if you look at the current way our lifestyles are, that is clearly unsustainable. But what we're not looking at is what would be better, what would be more sustainable, what would support both the people and the ecology. We have to look at that and do that. Mike, you say people aren't talking about the population problem. Well, they're even less talking about this. How do we live the right way? How do we live in a way that's sustainable, that's balanced, not just for the developed nations, but for all of them? One of the things is,
Pamela, I agree with you. The environmental movement, including Bill McKibben, have totally abandoned talking about limiting demand. All they are trying to do is limit supply, especially of energy. I mean, increase supply, especially of energy.
that's Mike. Oh, come on.
Sorry, what I
That's
said
not
is
true.
what
It's
it is.
not true.
Point me anywhere where 350.org talks about sustainability or talks about decreasing consumption.
Oh, well,
Or
I can
dealing
give
with-
you
with
link after link
population.
after link after link after link.
I've provided you with 3 of those links on Facebook. Provide me with one.
Let me do it right now. The drawdown project is a very excellent one. It shows you exactly how to do that.
How to do what?
It's how to increase sustainability, how to actually make the world work.
Maybe we should continue this in Facebook, you two.
In
Oh,
actual
Pamela?
already done stuff. Let me find that link.
and I just had a clarification, like my data also came from the US Census on the immigration, the ones that I showed earlier. That's in response to Mike's comment.
But immigration has been about 2.5 million per year for at least the last 10 years. The projections I got from the Census Bureau were what I said. Of course, they're projections. But I'm not seeing, at least on the Democratic side of the world, any wanting to decrease immigration. They seem to be wanting to increase immigration. And of course, McDonald's wants nothing more than every year more customers to eat their burgers and more cheap labor to flip them.
So the way I see it, by the way, one of the problems is, in fact, in developed countries, especially like the US, the decisions are made by, in fact, because there's a huge inequality in terms of wealth distribution and power distribution. Consequently, the decisions are made by, a very small, in the interest of the small minority who have, in fact, the wealth and the political power. That's what I think, by the way. Yeah. So it's in the
I'd just like
business
to
of,
make a comment about
yeah.
I would just like to make a comment about Paul's thought about, well, if more people lived in cities, we'd be better off. And maybe we would be slightly better off, But people in cities still need to eat. They still have trash to get rid of. They still need transportation. They still need water. You know, they have a little bit smaller environmental footprint. And on top of that, many, many people like to have nature, like to live in the suburbs or more rural. And is that something we want to sacrifice? You know, in Japan, they're faced with the situation that we could be faced in 50 years, you know, with their population, that everybody lives in a very small 1,000 square foot little condo, and the prices are so expensive, they have at least 100-year mortgage on it. Generations of people have to pay off that mortgage, and they, you know, they get very little space to ever see nature. You know, I don't see cities as our problem as a solution. You know, getting sustainable and ultimately reducing population, I believe, is the only way we can save life on our planet.
And I recommend the Drawdown Project to you, Mike. It is exactly about getting sustainable, including how to manage the lifestyle of people.
I'll take a look at it.
Drawdown 101 is an actual, it's a course. I think there's how many, 9, Andy, segments? 6 of different lengths, but the longest is a half an hour. It goes through the entire interrelated problem without.
Does this have anything to do with 350.org or the Sierra Club or any of those organizations?
Well,
Those are the ones I'm really learning to
They're out of Minnesota, and basically they're looking at all the solutions. There's about 80 solutions, small things they could do that would work towards climate change. And they're also partnering with industry on you know, taking steps to reduce these climate issues.
and the
Are they
also-
only focused on climate, or are they focused on
on life
something
on
much
Earth,
bigger?
sustainability?
The drawdown is drawdown on carbon.
It's making life on Earth possible. Okay, it's
Yeah.
everything.
Okay, I mean, Andy, you know, I think the carbon problem is a major problem, but there's so many problems that, you know, even if climate change were solved yesterday, we're still in great, great danger.
Agreed.
And vice versa. If population was solved yesterday, we'd still have the carbon problem.
Yep. I've
We
never
gotta
said,
do the
yeah.
sustainability, systemic lifestyle change, not degeneration, not based on how we're doing it now, which isn't right. We need to do it better.
I don't believe population is the only thing we need to do, but I do think it's an essential thing we need to do.
I agree with you 100%. It's essential.
Then what are all the things you keep pushing at me with
They're
Hans
essential.
Rosling?
They're also essential. I'm not pushing with you with anything except with Hans Rosling, except actual data. You complained when that chart you keep pushing, saying this much, this is what doing a certain thing does in order to save environmental impact, and this is this, and this is this, and see these little things like changing light bulbs and recycling, and it doesn't include the major changes like electrifying transportation and greening the grid.
Well, why don't you include anything you feel is missing? I believe that no matter what you do to it, the final result will still be one less child is worth more to the environment than anything one more child can do to conserve.
It depends on what the child uses in terms
No.
of resources. If we
No,
have
no,
sustainable lifestyles,
it is impossible for a person to be on the planet and be totally neutral to it. Sorry about that.
well, then what are you calling steady state?
The steady state has to do with an economic theory. It's apples and oranges.
No, it's all the same types of systems. Ecologies, economics, yes, environmental systems, those are all the same kinds of systems.
They're
I
all
think
related,
we're, I
but
think
they're
we're getting,
apples and oranges.
I think we're getting a little bit off topic here, and I'd like to kind of wrap it up.
I ask one question for Pamela, just basically, can the link that you're talking about for drawdown,
Mhm.
I'm on the drawdown site, I can see that. But the 101 stuff, I don't know where to find that.
On YouTube,
You can click on in the chat, on the link in the chat.
go to YouTube and search for a drawdown project.
And a lot of the things that we've gone to, Mike, you'll be happy to know, are sponsored also by the Sierra Club. It's not that, like, I wish that the groups trying to make the world better were more collaborative, but human beings, they're tribal. It's hard to get them to cooperate. Particularly when there's such powerful interests like the fossil fuel and the fossil fuel global lobbying and the
I'd like to, I am going to stop recording now. Just, I think I need to do that because it's going to be a very long video.